Alrighty, well, we might make a start. So for those who don't know me, my name's Michael Zollo and I'm a director at AE Advisors, and we were the lead manager to the small placement that accompanied Wednesday's announcement. So we first got, well, AE has been this has been a house stock for a while, but I first got involved with Whitebark in the February placement. If you recall, that was two tranches and didn't settle until about April or May. And look, we came in, or I came into this stock with a plan to help turn this thing around. Obviously, the previous sort of 4 or 5 years haven't been great for shareholders. And I came in with a plan to try to put some new eyes, some new investors, recapitalise it, look at some new assets, possibly try to bring in some new assets. And obviously, we brought the Officer Basin asset in, but also crucially, we wanted to look at the existing portfolio of assets and assess what value that we could get out of those, given that we already owned them and had sunk significant capital into them. In about May, we were lucky enough to be able to hire Nik Sykiotis, who's become the COO of Whitebark. Nik has an extensive background in oil and gas, worked for Chevron for 8 years, and so we were very, very happy to get him. At the time, we brought him in to run the Officer Basin project, but obviously the market didn't necessarily react to the Officer Basin project in the way we wanted it to, and we want to be proactive for shareholders, and we recognise that we probably needed to look at other things. Now, interestingly, Nik worked at Warro in the years immediately after Gina Rinehart bought 50% of that field, bought all of Warro and got 50% of the Perth Basin assets. So the key thing here about this Warro reevaluation is that Nik's not just sort of having a stab in the dark. He's got a very good and thorough background in the Perth Basin. He understands and knows and is connected to all of the key consultants that big companies like that like to use. And he knows all of the people in the key players in the Perth Basin, and there's 3 or 4 big players now building positions there. So he knows who you'd need to talk to at those organisations. And so when he came to us in about, I think, July or August and said, I really think this Warro asset needs to be looked at again. Initially, we scratched our head and said, well, that's caused some trouble in the past, maybe not. But he was insistent and he pushed and pushed. And that's when the Steve Adams report was commissioned. And again, I became aware of Steve Adams had done a report for Emperor Energy, which was done when they were sub 10 mil market cap. And that report helped Argonaut sort of put 3 significant institutions into the stock, and they haven't looked back. They said, hit 9 cents a few weeks ago, 75 mil market cap, based off an asset, Judith, which is a field in offshore Gippsland Basin, which had also had previous issues and was thought to be a troublesome field. But Steve has deep experience in going into these fields and looking for things that other people don't look for, and that's what he's done for us with Warro. That report was finalised in the previous few weeks. We've analysed his report, and we've released to market our findings on Wednesday. And so we are genuinely excited about what this means for Whitebark. The asset was definitely abandoned too quickly, and that often happens when you spend a lot of money and you run into technical problems, and large companies sort of look at a portfolio of 10 assets they could work on. And for Alcoa, who were spending the money at the time, it just didn't make sense to keep spending money. For a small company like us, this is a gold mine, potentially, or a gas field, more accurately, I guess. But and so we now owe it to shareholders to do all the work that is required to assess, exactly what this field has in terms of its potential to produce gas economically, how much, and what process would need to happen in order to get that, to commerciality. And we believe we know we believe we're in the early stages of knowing what that path is. And so, yeah, I'm really excited. And I'll hand over to Nik Sykiotis now, who can obviously run you through the technical aspects of what to do here.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Michael made a very nice summary of the situation at hand. I'll just cycle through the required disclaimers. Bear with me. And that one. And basically give you a little bit more colour on the Warro field. It is the largest discovered resource in the North Perth Basin. WBE discovered it back in 1977 and have always had trouble flowing it. Latent slash Alcoa had another look at it sort of early, I think late 2000s, early 2010s, 2009, 2011, somewhere there. They put $100 million into it, drilled 4 new wells, got gas to surface, which again, for those who know, getting gas to surface from any field is very difficult. So once you can do that, that's an awesome sign. But then also a lot of water came through, and obviously the JV sort of fell apart, and then people went their separate ways. So crucially, it's a massive resource, massive structure. We're close to a market, 30 kilometers from the DBNGP, which connects, the LNG plants in the north to the Perth gas market in the south. It's about a 2-hour drive from Perth, so it's all very, close to resources, close to employment centres, etc. As Michael said, Steve's very experienced. I worked with him, a couple of years ago back at FAR. He's done this sort of work all around the world. You sort of get people like Steve in when the usual petrophysics hasn't worked or hasn't given you sort of a great answer to your problems. To be fair, this data set as well is quite incomplete. There's several logs, for example, the NMR log or the image log that weren't acquired by previous operators. So there's data gaps there. But with what we've got, we've been able to put a story together that makes sense and explains at least some of the observations that we're seeing in those 4 wells. The other thing is, as everyone knows, it's just the market's really tight. Lots of players are looking to expand their gas assets. So if we can even get a small volume of gas out of this field, it's going to be very lucrative given our current market cap. Again, this did it for me when I was reading the Warro 4-well test report, and you see an ice flare like that on surface, you say, well, there's got to be something here, and there is, in my opinion. So what the new analysis shows is that there's mobile gas zones, but also mobile water zones. So in the past, we believe that Warro 4, for example, is about 300-400 meter column of gas, and it was pretty much all interpreted as gas. I'll show you in the next slide that you need a little bit more nuance than that. Certain intervals will flow dry gas, certain intervals are fractured and will flow high volumes of water, and certain intervals will flow gas and water, but predominantly water. So you need that level of detail and nuance to get these sort of fields to flow properly. Yes, that's what we were talking about there. So despite saying that you're excluding a fair bit of the reservoir, it's still 15-meter intervals of thick gas-bearing sand. So to put that in perspective, that's a 5-story building, right? So it's not as if we've destroyed the resource here. And equally, outside what we've seen from the wells, things can connect up in different ways, which is good and bad. But fundamentally speaking, there's still good pathways and good gas resources in this field. This is the crux of the presentation, really. As you can see, this is the Warro 4 wellbore. It was fracked. Stage 1 frack went from 40-15 meters to 40-86, so about a 80-meter interval. You can see the detail here. In the past, they fracked that whole interval, assuming it was all gas. What we've since discovered with Steve's work is that there's intervals of gas, mobile gas. So this track here, the light pink is immobile gas, and the red is mobile gas, and the blue is water. This track here, the second track, you see these green intervals. That's from the density logs. That's not ideal, but it does show areas of higher fracture density. And so we believe water probably came in from this interval here, from these 5 meters at high velocity. If you go further down, we've got a nice 15-meter interval of dry gas. We've got, after that, another 5 intervals of likely water-bearing gas, and then another 20-odd meters of dry gas. So this was stimulated, fracked. So if we had our time again, we wouldn't have done the whole 80 meters. We would have done this interval and that interval, and we would have seen what the well could have delivered. Just on that, once water enters the wellbore, it does suppress the gas deliverability of the productive intervals. So even though we had sort of 1 or 2 million scuffs a day, I think it's highly likely that that gas rate, if it's flowing pure gas, could be much higher. So again, this flows into the commerciality of the field. We know it's got a massive resource, but getting more gas out, per well is actually a very good thing. So yeah, the trick for us is to get sustained gas to surface at reasonable rates, and that'll unlock the potential of this field. Um, so in terms of the Warro field, we own 100% of it, which is great, which means we can, have flexibility in who we partner with, what we do with it. There's no JV partner to appease. We're at the beginning of the technical review. The next step would be to look at the production data, the PLTs, the frac reports, with a qualified engineer. I've got someone in mind who's done a lot of work in the basin and is respected like Steve, and try and sort of match what Steve saw with what came out of the ground at certain intervals. Once that's done, we'll get a plan together to see what we can retest with the existing well bores, potentially do a sidetrack, and also potentially look at the deeper potential of the basin. As many people who've followed the Perth Basin know, there's been a theme since the 70s that there was this porosity floor in people's minds that there's no porosity below 3,500 meters. That paradigm was challenged earlier this decade and the previous decade as well, when people started drilling deeper. And quite frankly, we don't know where the porosity floor is. Some wells have gotten to 4,500 meters and they've flowed gas. To be fair, it's a different reservoir interval, the Permian, which has special coatings, etc., and there's reasons why it perhaps flows that deep. But we don't know until we test it, and a lot of these wells have already gotten down to the 4,000-meter mark, so all the heavy work's been done. If we can have a really good look at the seismic, perhaps do a seismic reprocessing project, identify some new targets and that are accessible from the existing well bores, that's a great test as well. So there's a lot of potential there. We won't do this as a company. We will look to partner up, get a farm-in to fund a lot of this, but again, for a relatively modest, outlay, we're not talking of tens of millions of dollars. We'll be able to get a lot of information and basically prove the concept. I must say that it's an old permit, R7, so we have the ability to fracture simulate it. The regulations are still being worked on by the government, so there's a bit more detail to come out before we can fully understand what we can and cannot do. But in theory, we can frack it, and sections of this reservoir will need fracking to flow, on a long-term basis. And as I say, for me, just keep coming back to these two things. Gas flow to surface, and the structure's massive. I mean, it's 1.3 TCF onshore in the low case contingent. I mean, to be fair, this was done a while ago, but still, if we can get a small, 50 Bs out of that, 100 Bs, it's still a massive resource for a small company like us. More broadly, what's Whitebark all about? We've got a 3H strategy, so we're looking for natural hydrogen, natural helium, and hydrocarbons. Obviously, Warro fits in the hydrocarbon basket. Our Officer Basin acreage has potential for all three. We're not looking to do manufactured hydrogen, so we don't need electrolyzers, etc. It really is what's been created naturally by the earth and reservoired sort of conventionally, or stuff that the oil industry's been tapping into for the last 100 years. We have direct hydrogen, helium, and hydrocarbons measured on our Officer Basin acreage, on block and in surrounding basins like the Amadeus or the Yorke Peninsula. We believe the rocks that generated the hydrogen and helium in the Amadeus and the Yorke Peninsula, the Hill Tarbor Suite, it's a granite/syenite suite that extends underneath our acreage. And I suppose one thing that really got me excited about this acreage was a nice thick salt seal in the Alinea, which I'll show in the next in the next seismic section, the next slide. And you need salt. It's an old basin. If it's going to trap something for hundreds of millions of years, you really do need that salt seal, and we've got it, proven by 2 recent wells. Additionally, we've got a large seismically defined structure, the Rickerscope prospect, which has been independently certified by Doug Beringer's Fluid Consultants and also ERCE. Doug did the hydrocarbons. He's quite an expert in that area. There's methane and black oil potential for Rickerscote. And ERC looked at the case where the two bottom reservoirs are filled with hydrogen and helium. They're sort of global experts in this field. I mean, to be fair, no one's a global expert. We haven't actually found, no one in the world has found a dry gas accumulation, a substantial dry gas accumulation of hydrogen or helium. So it is very much the bleeding edge. But I just came back from a conference in Harndorf. There's a lot of people interested in this space. There's a lot of money willing to back projects like ours. So I'm very confident that we'll be able to find a good partner and get this drilled in the next 12 to 18 months. Yep, so I'll go to the next slide. So this is the Alinea project. As I said, this pink permit is ours, 20,000 square kilometers. These two wells, Mulya Warro 1 and Kujara 1, very important. They were drilled by Radinia Oil back in 2009. They're only 2 of 3 wells to have penetrated the salt seal. I must say this is quite shallow. It's only 2,500 meters. So the reservoirs here don't need fracture stimulation. They've got good porosity and permeability. So Mulya Warro and Kujara actually proved 3 out of the 4 elements required for a successful petroleum/hydrogen helium trap. They proved the seals, they proved the reservoirs, they proved the source. There was gas shows all up and down these wells. The only thing missing was a trap. And we think they missed the trap because there was 2D seismic. They were in the corner of the block and they got an aliasing. It's a bit technical, but basically they thought they were drilling a 4-way and it was a plunging nose, we think. So from our point of view, it's an invalid test. The Rickerscote project that I'm talking about is here. It's a 3-way thrust structure going on top of the granite. And we think that is a valid trap, which I'll show in the next slide. And yeah, we're quite excited by it. I just came back from the field there. It is quite remote, but equally there is infrastructure. We've got the Amberdell Highway, which runs from Coober Pedy all the way to Laverton. It goes 10 kilometres north of Rickerscote. It's currently in pretty bad shape, but with a good grader, you'll be able to get a rig down there, no problems. This is how they got the rig into Mulya Warro and Kujara, I believe. There's the east-west rail line just to the south of our permit. There's the north-south rail line just around Coober Pedy. So we're remote, but if we do find something, there are paths to market. There are paths to commercialization. Moomba's 600 meters away. We could potentially build a pipeline if the resources are large enough. In addition, we've got good land access from the MT people. We've got a land access agreement already in place. We don't have to go through native title. We own 100% of this acreage as well, which again gives us full flexibility in terms of who we bring in to farm in and who we make all the decisions basically. So seismic line. Here's the extensive salt that I'm talking about. The peralkaline granitic source rock at the base. We have a really nice Pindian sandstone, which was proven in Mulya Warro and Kujara. So all that's there. Mount Kitty, one of the in the north, in the Amadeus Basin, one of the highest hydrogen and helium strikes ever discovered in the world. That was missing a good reservoir. So the equivalent up there was only about 0.7 meters net and 0.04% effective porosity. Whereas here, because the burial history of the basin's been different, we believe that the reservoir here will be much, much better. Here are the results of the independently certified of the certification. You can see in the mid case, just for one structure, Rickerscote, we've got a TCF up to 4. I should also say that after the Rickerscote is just one structure in the 20,000 square kilometres. Should that come in, we've got another 20 identified. Again on 2D regional seismic, but there's a lot of follow-up. So this would be a play opening well, and we'd have massive running room. We've also got lots of liquids, 386 at Milford. There's a couple of follow-up structures, and Milford East, 256 million barrels. In addition, in the hydrogen case, we've got 1.2 billion kilograms of hydrogen in the high case for Rickerscote and 209 BCF of helium. Helium's great. It's a low volume, high value product. They've shipped it out on trucks from the Amadeus Basin for many years. So again, there's no cutting edge technology required. The well we want to drill is pretty straightforward. Standard casing sizes, standard rigs that are available. We have tested the market. And should we find hydrogen, there's multiple ways we can monetize that as well. That's basically my presentation. I'd love to hear some questions from the crew.
Yeah, Nick. So one of the questions that came through, and just a reminder to everyone on the call that the Q&A box is open if you do want to ask questions, or you can reach out after the webinar. But one of the questions was, are you talking to any potential partners or buyers after this update for JVs or anything like that for the field?
For Warro or
for Warro? Yeah.
Not yet. No, we haven't spoken to anyone at
Yep.
the moment. But we would look to partner with someone at some point, I think.
And just waiting if there's any more questions coming
I
through.
mean, Pete, I'll just add some detail. I mean, in response to that question, ultimately what Whitebark has to do now is a few follow-up tests and sort of basically to collate further data on Warro that can justify its view, and then take that to obviously to some larger sort of majors that can look at funding that. But it's also crucial to point out that they don't need to spend a lot of money on this sort of stuff. This is, it's sub $200,000 to get this ready for, like for a major to look at. So it's very cheap, and there'll be constant news flow because these small data pieces, small studies and reports, etc., will be done on an ongoing basis, and obviously reported to market when we sort of get the results.
Yeah, that's right. It's we are just de-risking as we go, and there's decent amount of data out there already, so it's just people's time. But eventually we'll have to go in and obviously test, and that's when we'd bring a partner in.
Thanks, Nick. And another question that's come through for Warro again. If everything went according to plan, what sort of flow rates would you expect if no water?
Yeah, look, it is hard to tell, because it does need fracture stimulation, and obviously there's a lot of variables, but I think it would be better than 1.2 or 2 million scuffs a day that we were getting. As I say, I hesitate to give a direct answer because I honestly don't know. But at those pressures, at that depth, you could get significantly more, in my opinion.
And another question that's just come through: could you run through the board's technical capabilities, and would we add to that any further? And the team that's currently on board.
Yep. So we're currently blessed with some really good people on the board. So we've got Tino Guglielmo. He's a very experienced operator. He's an engineer, I think, by background. He worked at Santos for many years, and I think he's the managing director of BAS Oil and Gas. We also have Rosalind, Rosalind Archer, I believe. Forgot her surname. Sorry. She's actually she taught me reservoir engineering in a short course once. She went through Stanford. Is a very accomplished reservoir engineer and academic in her own right. So she's an invaluable resource to have. In terms of management capability, I'm a fully qualified geologist. I did my honours at the School of Petroleum back in 2010. I went through the Chevron graduate program, so it's a 5-year program. They put in about $1 million worth of training into us, so it was a really good program. But like Michael said in the introduction, I've worked with a lot of the major consultants in the Perth Basin. Perth Basin is a difficult area. It's deep, it's hot. So having worked with a lot of these people, I know what they're capable of, what they're good at, and I've got their phone number, so to speak. So easy to bring in expertise as required. But yeah, I don't think it would be expanding the team at this point. It would mainly be contractors doing bits of defined work, which helps keep costs down and keep everyone focused.
Can I just add a bit of detail there as well? having spent 18 years looking at small, micro cap companies, resources, oil and gas, everything, the whole gamut, the dream team is a few older heads on the board, and then, Nik's perfect level of experience. He's sort of 15 years in the oil and gas game, was a geologist before that, at a gold mine, etc. But he's still young enough and has the passion, and we're going to incentivize him with an options package, etc., that he wants to make this work, and this would be a significant sort of notch on his belt, in the industry. So that's your perfect team, ideally. Some old wise heads on the board that can guide and give advice, and then somebody who's not young, but sort of that middle level of experience. Very keen, very passionate, driven to make this work.
Yeah, and I mean, I was in the Officer Basin 3 days ago, sleeping in a swag. Like I'm not afraid to get after it. I really wanted these assets to work because I believe in them. I do think there's really good geology here, and for a reasonably small amount of money, we can have a massive impact.
Thanks, Nik. And another question that's come through is, in terms of the WA gas market and all the number of projects being developed in the area, how do parties like Beach see gas in the area?
It's funny, I actually worked for Beach too for a couple of years, but I won't speak for them. Look, my take on the gas market is it's still very tight. In general, the Perth Basin has surprised on the downside. Things are smaller than people first expected. These things are a lot more disconnected than they first expected, which comes with the territory. It is these play intervals are reasonably new, and we haven't produced significant amounts of gas from them to understand them. The good thing is for us is, we picked this asset up reasonably cheaply, right? So there's no sort of sunk cost in some ways from a Whitebark point of view. Anything we can get out is upside. But in general, on the macro level, there's still, I think AEMA is still, forecasting shortfalls into the future. I know that end users like, some of the fertilizer companies, some of the, heavy industry companies are finding it hard to sign contracts at reasonable rates into the future. So we need gas. We need a lot of it for many years, and people aren't exploring. And it's also getting harder to get these things permitted. I must say that as well. It's having an approved permitted field discovery 30 kilometers from a major pipeline. It's just amazing, I think. So.
Thanks, Nik. I've just got another one here. It may be a bit early on this one, but in terms of cash flows, what would yearly revenue look like in a low case, high case per year, and connecting to the pipeline 30 kilometers away? Would you have to pay a toll? I know that might be a bit early for those questions.
Yeah, look, it is a bit early. But yeah, I mean, it really depends on flow rates. It really depends on well counts, etc. But it is a dry gas. I'll give you this. It is a dry gas. There's not many impurities. So the plant that we'd need to build would be a lot more similar to the one they built at Wallering, which I think was done pretty well and came in on budget and on time. So, the CapEx after this would be reasonably cheap. In terms of revenue, I just don't know. I can't answer that question at the moment. And to pay a toll, yeah, it's pretty standard. You have to pay some sort of processing toll to the pipeline operator, but it's not onerous compared to the value of the gas. It's pretty small.
Yeah. And another one, what do you think the catalyst events that investors should look for in the next 12 months?
Okay, so I suppose for Warro, it would be finishing the studies. So once we finished all our DD, it would get to a point where, yes, this makes sense to do more on ground work or not. Then it would be another event would be signing up someone who'd be prepared to fund it for some sort of deal, offtake or equity share, etc. So I think they're the two key ones for Warro. But I mean, there'll be little ones along the way as well. It wouldn't be just two announcements. There'll be a lot more as we de-risk the science and do more work. We would let the market know. In terms of the Officer Basin, really it would be signing in a farminee who again would be interested in drilling the well that we're thinking of, and then obviously preparing to drill the well. So following us along that journey would definitely have many catalyst events. Michael, do you have any opinion on that?
Look, I think you've laid out the catalyst events, pretty well. Obviously, oil and gas is one of those games where, for example, the Officer Basin, we know there are people very interested in it. You know, green hydrogen has certainly run into some issues, but natural hydrogen is where all the actual money is now going. We know that Coloma has got, I was told they've got $30 million to spend just in South Australia. That's not Australia, that's just South Australia. And, there aren't too many, options really. We know that the Japanese group, I can't remember the name, it escapes me, but that came into the gold hydrogen placement and are looking to do a deal there. And that was a significant investment for them, I think greater than $20 million. So there's money around. These catalysts are significant for a very low market cap company, keeping in mind gold hydrogen is capped at something like $100 million and got as high as 200 million. So for a little $5 million minnow, these are massive re-rate events, but, can you be certain when they arrive, etc.? Of course not. But what we know is we've got, as good a technical team as you could hope on a $5 million company working towards achieving those milestones. So, we're sort of, and we're all sort of running a million miles an hour. We've got cash now in the door, so, no imminent raise. I'm sure that if the price was to keep going and we were sort of, I think, valued where we thought was probably fairer, we would look at sort of potentially trying to get some strategic guys in. We are connected with a few of the funds that came into Emperor, for example, and they're the sort of funds that like to, sort of invest together and sort of get on market and support, etc. So there's a lot of things, in the air, and the next 12 months, I would say, are going to be filled with, with good news and, and excitement. Everyone always wants the time frame, run down, how many weeks. It's a bit difficult to do that, but we know what we're sitting on. We're excited about it. We think, the next 12 months is going to be really good. Just in terms of the cash flow thing, again, I won't talk to Warro at all. What I would say though is if you have a Perth Basin asset that's got about, call it 500 BCF, whatever field it is, and that converts sort of, roughly give or take to about a bit over 500 petajoules, at the current price that's going, which I think is about $5 to $7 a gigajoule in Perth Basin gas, you're looking at about $3.5 billion of revenue for a 500 BCF field. So, that's got nothing to do with Warro. That's just what you would get for if you were selling 500 BCF into the spot market right now. So, do with that what you will.
And just another one, Nik, which you probably can cover. When the Warro asset was acquired, how developed were the assets compared to Warro now, and what was the total consideration?
Okay. So again, I can't talk too specifically about Warro, but I mean, it was in the appraisal stage. They hadn't actually taken FID. I think that's public. There was still questions about the field that still needed to be answered. So in some ways, it was in a similar state to where we are. They had a reserve certification done. So that's one step further along the chain or along the pathway to commercialization. I believe Hancock bought Warro for about $440 million. So that was the takeover of the whole company. But really, at the time, it was the main asset. So you could,
And that was for 50% of the
50%.
asset.
That's right, 50% of the asset.
So that field was effectively valued, close to $900 million.
That's right. So, I'll let you, go in and dig deeper into the details of the announcements from Warro. I think they're still online. But yeah, it wasn't a producing field. There wasn't revenue coming through the door. In some ways, it's similar to where we are now. The only caveat as well is that one flows naturally. We need stimulation, so that's quite a big difference. But yeah.
Yeah. And another one here is, and we may be a little bit early on this as well, but what would an ideal farm-in partnership look like? I'm assuming this is for the Warro asset.
We've got an open mind, I think. Yeah, really, we'll talk to everyone and anyone, friends of all, enemies of none. we're looking to bring in people that want to develop the asset properly. We don't want to just get stuck in some sort of, seriatim that gets parked. Having said that, it really depends on what discussions we have with different parties, etc. And obviously, the board will do what's in the shareholders' best interests.
Yep.
Ideally, with any farming, you're always looking to get the maximum carry.
Yes.
So ideally, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Nick, but probably one course of action that's been discussed as a possible course of action is to bring someone in to drill 2 sidetrack wells, which would cost about $10 million. Now, how much of the field do you give away for that? Who knows? But we would certainly be hoping to retain no less than 50% of it. But it's these are early discussions, that back of the envelope numbers that really don't mean anything until you actually receive firm offers.
Yeah, get an interested party. The other thing is we can be creative as well. It could be offtake that people are after. It could be supply certainty. So we'll talk to everyone about the asset and what they can bring to the table and how we can work together.
Thanks, Nick. And do you expect in the next 12 months to get a reserve certification?
It's a tricky one, and I need to sort of discuss it with the board first in terms of whether we want to prove the concept flow gas to the surface again before we go to a reserve certification, or do we just take the information we have now, the new petrophysical interpretation, whatever outcomes come from the petroleum engineering, etc., and take it and see. It's something we'd probably work with the certifiers on, just to see what level of information and how comfortable they are to provide a certification. We definitely have a contingent resource. We've flown gas to the surface. We need to do a commercial review to ensure that it moves from the contingent to the reserve section of the under PRMS. The big, which is the next question as well, the biggest, I suppose, unknown is the government approvals for stimulation. What can and cannot be done, and that will inform flow rates, etc., well count. So look, ideally, yes, within 6 to 12 months, we'd like to get some sort of official certification done. It may take a bit longer depending on the studies and depending on how long the certifier needs to do their work. But equally, it depends on how long the government takes to put the final set of regs out that we have to work to. So I know I'm saying, there's a lot of unknowns, but that's the ultimate path, because once you've got decent reserve certification, you've got a good partner. That's when you can really monetize the asset and sort of secure full value.
Thanks, Nick. I think we'll leave it there in terms of questions. I'll let you wrap up.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for taking the time to hear us. We're quite a new management team. We're excited about the assets. We've got good support from the board. We really want to get after things and get activity on our permits. Hopefully keep you informed and some good news comes out in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for joining, everyone.